Imagine you are the rarest large mammal on Earth. There are fewer than 70 of you left in existence.
Which is just a crazy number to think about.
Right, and every single one of your family members, I mean your entire species, lives on the exact same tiny peninsula, just waiting for a single natural disaster or, a stray disease outbreak to wipe you out completely. This is the incredibly precarious reality for the Javan rhino.
It really is the ultimate conservation tightrope walk.
Yeah.
You have this massive, prehistoric-looking animal basically balancing on a geographical pinhead.
Yeah, welcome to today's deep dive. We've gathered a stack of sources for you today. We have a comprehensive IUCN Red List assessment, a spatial modeling study mapping out potential new real estate for these rhinos, and this really fascinating botanical study about a highly aggressive invasive palm tree.
Yeah, that palm tree study is wild.
It is. So our mission today is to unpack the surprisingly complex multi-front war being waged to save the Javan rhino from extinction. Because saving a species isn't just about stopping poachers,
Right, not at all.
It is about real estate, it's about mud, and it requires neutralizing a very specific botanical villain. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to really grasp the stakes here, the IUCN Red List data provides the baseline. The Javan rhino, or Rhinoceros sondaicus, is listed as critically endangered.
Very critically.
Yeah. Historically, these animals had a massive range. I mean, they roamed all the way from Bangladesh and Myanmar through Thailand, Vietnam, and into southern China, and then down through peninsular Malaysia to Sumatra and Java.
But today, the entire global population, which is an estimated 68 individuals, is trapped in one single location, Ujung Kulon National Park, which is located on the extreme western tip of Java in Indonesia, 68. And looking through the data, they literally do not exist anywhere else.
Exactly, yeah.
Not a single Javan rhino is in a zoo or like a captive breeding program.
And the historical timeline shows just how rapidly that contraction happened. Like in 2010, the very last known Javan rhino outside of Indonesia was found dead in Vietnam's Cat Hien National Park.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It was. It had been poached, the horn taken, marking the official extinction of the Vietnamese subspecies.
Which makes Ujung Kulon the absolute last stand. Now, the sources show the anti-poaching patrols there, the rhino protection units, have been incredibly successful. Like, there are no recorded poaching incidents in the park in over 2 decades.
That's a huge achievement.
It is. So, on paper, you might think, well, the problem is solved, the perimeter is secure. But the IUCN data outlines threats that, guns and patrols just cannot stop.
Right, because when your entire population is concentrated in a few thousand hectares, ordinary environmental variables sort of mutate into existential threats.
Yeah.
Disease transmission is a major one. Local villagers keep domestic cattle near the park boundaries, and those cattle can transmit pathogens like anthrax or hemorrhagic septicemia.
And the rhinos just don't have any built-in immunity against those, right?
Exactly. Then you have extreme food competition. The park supports a population of about 800 Javan banting, which is a species of wild cattle, and they are browsing the exact same understory plants the rhinos rely on.
But, the most terrifying threat in the assessment is purely geological. The active Anak Krakatau volcano sits in the Sunda Strait, remarkably close to the rhino habitat.
Yeah, people are familiar with the 1883 Krakatau eruption, which caused a massive tsunami that decimated the coastal areas of this specific region.
Right, the original one.
Right. And more recently, in 2018, Anak Krakatau erupted again and caused another deadly tsunami. The rhinos happened to be spared that time, but it was a glaring geological warning system going off.
Yeah, keeping the entire species on one peninsula is basically like keeping your entire life savings and cash inside a wooden house next door to a fireworks factory.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Like one spark, or in this case, one tsunami, and it's all gone.
What's fascinating here is how modern conservation strategies have shifted to address this. Protecting the animals in their current habitat is just no longer sufficient.
Yeah, they need a backup plan.
The biological imperative is geographical redundancy. We have to find them a second independent home.
But finding that second location isn't as simple as sectioning off a random piece of jungle. The spatial modeling study by Latifiana and colleagues looks at an area right next door to the current habitat called Mount Hanje.
Right.
To figure out if it's viable, the researchers use Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, combined with predictive modeling software called Maxent. I was looking into the methodology, and from what I gather, MAXENT, which stands for maximum entropy, it takes the known coordinates of where the rhinos currently live, right?
Exactly.
And it analyzes the environmental variables of those spots and then scans the new landscape to find areas with the exact same statistical profile.
That is the core mechanism of the software, yeah.
Yeah.
Because MaxEnt takes incomplete data, since we obviously can't track every single movement of every single rhino, and it calculates the probability of species occurring in a given space based on those environmental constraints.
Okay, so what constraints do they use?
Well, for the Javan Rhino, the scientists mapped 5 very specific variables across the Mount Hanjay landscape.
The first variable is the distance from a stream, which, makes straightforward sense for a large mammal needing drinking water.
Sure.
The second is potential forage, measuring the density of the specific plant species they actually digest. But the third variable is flow accumulation. The researchers actually map the topography to find where water naturally pools and stagnates across the landscape.
Which is incredibly critical because rhinos require constant access to mud wallows. They actually lack sweat glands, so a thick coating of mud is their primary thermoregulation mechanism.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they didn't have sweat glands.
Yeah. So the mud cools their core body temperature, and it acts as a physical barrier against biting insects and helps suffocate ectoparasites like ticks.
Makes sense.
And beyond the physical benefits, these flow accumulation points serve as olfactory communication hubs. Rhinos leave distinct chemical signatures in the mud to signal reproductive status and territory to other individuals.
It's like a rhino message board.
Essentially, yeah.
Now, the fourth variable the model relies on is NDVI, the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. I'm fascinated by the physics behind this.
It's really cool tech.
Right. Satellites orbiting the Earth measure the exact wavelengths of light bouncing off the forest. Healthy, dense leaves absorb visible red light for photosynthesis, but they highly reflect near-infrared light.
Right.
So by calculating the mathematical difference between those two wavelengths, the satellite creates a map of canopy density.
Because the Javan rhino requires an incredibly dense, closed canopy overhead. They are a forest-dwelling species that relies on deep shade for refuge and temperature control.
So the NDVI tells them where the shade is.
Exactly. A high NDVI score tells the MaxEnt model that the forest architecture in that specific pixel of the map is thick enough to support a rhino.
Okay, so the model layers the drinking water, the forage, the mud pools, and the canopy density. But there is a fifth variable that completely overrides all the others, like the absolute deal breaker.
Yep, the slope of the terrain.
Yeah. The results show that while about 60% of the national park is technically suitable based on the first 4 variables, the Javan rhino heavily prefers flat lowlands and actively avoids the hilly terrain of Mount Hanjay.
Right.
But wait, these are massive, powerful, armored animals. Why are they so incredibly picky about a little incline? Are they just lazy?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this avoidance of slopes is driven by evolutionary economics. A mature Javan rhino weighs up to 2 tons.
2 tons, wow.
The biomechanical effort required to haul 2 tons of mass up a 60-degree incline is immense. They operate on a strict daily calorie budget.
Oh, I see.
If they burn thousands of calories just navigating a mountain ridge, they essentially go biologically bankrupt.
So they're just really efficient energy managers.
Exactly. Wasting metabolic energy on unnecessary elevation gain means they have fewer internal resources available for immune response against those cattle diseases we mentioned, and drastically less energy for reproduction. Navigating steep terrain on a daily basis simply does not make physiological sense for a massive browser.
That makes total sense. Okay, so let's say the MaxEnt model identifies the perfect pocket of flat lowland in Mount Hanjay. The canopy is thick, the mud is deep, the streams are close, the expansion seems ready.
It looks perfect on paper.
Right, but when the rangers actually get on the ground, they find the landscape has already been conquered by a completely different enemy. This introduces the study by Robiancia on the Langkap palm, or Arenga obtusifolia.
Yeah, this palm is native to the region, but it operates as a highly invasive species within the specific boundaries of the park. It currently blankets around 18,000 hectares.
That's huge.
Over 14% of the entire national park is just dominated by this single palm species.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Reading the botanical breakdown, the Langkap palm doesn't just outgrow other plants, it utilizes a highly militarized evolutionary strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
Starting with its reproduction. A single fruiting stalk drops up to 5,400 seeds. But plenty of plants produce massive amounts of seeds. The Langkap palm pairs that volume with a brutal chemical defense mechanism.
The immature seeds are packed with extreme concentrations of calcium oxalate crystals, which are known as rhaphides.
Yeah, I looked into these rhaphides. At a microscopic level, they are actually shaped like double-ended needles.
Ouch.
Right. When an animal tries to eat the young fruit, these microscopic needles physically puncture the tissues of the mouth and digestive tract, causing immediate severe inflammation and swelling.
It guarantees that nothing in the forest ecosystem will consume the seeds while they are young and vulnerable. Herbivores quickly learn to avoid them.
Because it hurts so much.
Exactly. The palm essentially forces the local wildlife to wait until the seeds are fully mature and the oxalate levels drop. Only then is the fruit safe to eat, allowing the animals to digest the exterior and disperse the mature seeds in their droppings. The palm commands the timeline of his own consumption.
It's like a botanical bully.
It really is.
And once it establishes itself, the palm fundamentally alters the architecture of the entire forest. It grows in dense, clustered formations and produces massive, sprawling fronds. The study measures that these fronds are so thick, they block over 95% of sunlight from reaching the forest floor.
And the ecological consequence of that shade is total understory collapse. Without sunlight, the saplings, shrubs, and leafy ground plants wither and die.
And those are the plants the rhinos need.
Exactly. Those specific understory plants are the exact forage the Javan rhino relies on. The Langkap palm stars out the competing vegetation, replacing a diverse food pantry with a dark, barren floor.
So, to make this new habitat viable, park management has to eradicate this bully. The initial intuitive thought is to send in a team with chainsaws and machetes to cut the palms down. But the source documents note that mechanical cutting is completely ineffective.
Yeah, when you sever the above-ground trunk of a Langkap palm, you are barely damaging the actual organism. The palm operates on a massive network of subterranean rhizomes, these underground rootstocks.
It's basically like a decentralized botnet. You shut down one physical terminal, and the underground network immediately routes resources to spin up 3 more.
Cutting the main trunk acts as an acute stress signal. The plant responds by regenerating shoots from the root system at an accelerated rate.
Wow.
And beyond the biological resilience of the palm, the sheer manual labor required to continuously clear-cut 18,000 hectares of dense forest by hand is logistically impossible.
Right, so the successful solution they arrived at is jarring to read at first. To save this pristine, ancient, strictly protected World Heritage Site, they have to deploy industrial chemical herbicides. Specifically, they inject glyphosate directly into the trunks of the Langkap palms.
This raises an important question about active ecological management. Glyphosate works by targeting a very specific biological pathway, the shikimate pathway.
Right, I was diving into the chemistry of this. The shikimate pathway is a metabolic route used by plants and some bacteria to synthesize essential amino acids. Animals and humans do not have this pathway at all, which is why glyphosate disrupts plant life, but doesn't act as a direct poison to the animals walking by.
And by injecting it directly into the trunk rather than spraying it indiscriminately over the canopy, the herbicide travels systemically through the palm's vascular tissue. It reaches all the way down into that decentralized underground rhizome network.
Taking out the whole botnet.
Exactly. It blocks the enzyme EPSP synthase, halting amino acid production. Within 3 months, the entire Langkap palm structure dies, roots and all, preventing the regeneration effect.
And the localized injection means the surrounding soil and non-target plants remain uncontaminated. And the ecological bounce back is incredible.
It really is fast.
The study meticulously tracks the aftermath. Once the palm canopy dies and the 95% shade is lifted, sunlight hits the forest floor again. Within a short period, over 90% of the cleared area is naturally repopulated by the exact leafy plant species that the Javan rhino prefers to eat.
It demonstrates that leaving nature alone is not always a viable conservation strategy. When an ecosystem has lost its equilibrium, perhaps due to past human land use or the removal of natural population controls for the palm, correcting that imbalance requires highly targeted, aggressive intervention.
And the data proves this intervention works. By the end of 2018, the teams had successfully cleared 150 hectares of the Langkap palm in the Ganwanghanji area using this injection method. And the most vital metric of success, tracking data, confirmed that at least 10 rhinos are actively utilizing this newly restored habitat.
That's amazing.
They opened the canopy, the food grew back, and the rhinos moved in.
It is a profound, hard-won victory, but it is a victory sustained entirely by perpetual human effort.
Yeah, saving the Javan rhino is an exercise in ultimate micromanagement. You cannot simply designate a piece of land as a national park, draw a boundary on a map, and expect the ecosystem to manage itself.
Not at all.
It requires armed guards constantly securing the perimeter. It requires satellites calculating infrared light to map out canopy density and soil slopes. And it requires rangers trekking through dense jungle to meticulously inject herbicide into thousands of invasive trees, one by one.
It demands an intimate understanding of the mechanical gears turning within the ecosystem, from the biomechanics of a rhino's caloric expenditure to the metabolic pathways of an invasive plant.
I think that is a brilliant takeaway for you listening to this right now. Systems, whether they are critically endangered biomes, complex corporate structures, or your own daily routines, they do not naturally default to a state of optimal growth just because you establish a boundary.
Right. Things inevitably get messy.
Left unchecked, a system will naturally accumulate its own version of Langkap palms, obstacles that hog the resources and block the light. Creating space for growth requires active, continuous auditing. You have to locate the roots of the obstruction and systematically dismantle them.
You have to clear the canopy to let the resources reach the ground level.
So what does this all mean? The rangers have the Maxin maps. They understand the biochemistry of the weeds. They're successfully clearing the terrain, and some rhinos are expanding their territory. Are we finally out of the woods?
Well, I want to leave you with one final lingering puzzle drawn straight from that initial IUCN assessment. We have the technology to expand the habitat, but we are bound by biological reality. The data reveals that out of the 68 remaining Javan rhinos, only an estimated 33% of the adults are actively reproductive.
Oh, wow. So only a third of the adults are actually capable of adding to the population. You are looking at a breeding pool of perhaps 18 to 20 individuals.
Combine that small pool with their reproductive mechanics. A female rhino has a 16-month gestation period, and they only reach sexual maturity around age 6 or 7. The biological birth rate is agonizingly slow.
So we have poured satellite technology, chemical engineering, and decades of armed patrols into solving the real estate problem and the food shortage.
But the provocative question remains. If we successfully construct this massive, pristine, mathematically optimized new habitat, but the population's intrinsic birth rate remains this slow, are we meticulously building empty houses for a species that simply cannot reproduce fast enough to fill them?
That's a haunting thought.
Could the ultimate bottleneck after defeating the poachers and the palms simply be their own biological clock?
We've eliminated the external threats, only to be held hostage by the internal mechanics of the species itself. Something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Next time you feel overwhelmed by the fragility of a complex project you are managing, just remember what it takes to keep the rarest large mammal on Earth alive on a single peninsula, continually clearing the canopy and waiting for the slow clock of nature to catch up.